my father's prayers on my behalf have saved me in instances where I was not righteous enough to be saved. So what this is, ancient treaties and covenants followed specific patterns: preamble, history, stipulations, blessing, curses, witnesses. Example is King Benjamin's speech, Mosiah 2-5. It mirrors what's called a suzerain vassal treaty from the ancient Near East. So what that is a formal covenant or treaty made between a king and a lesser king or people, the vassal. So the king offers protection and blessings. The people swear loyalty and obedience. The treaties were common in Hittite, Assyrian, and Israelite traditions from 1500 to 600 BC and followed a specific literary structure. Now, what's so interesting to me about this is like this idea that they call also savior kings. When I was studying this, I was struck profoundly by this. So Hezekiah, ancient king over Israel, there's a point where Israel is under siege, and Hezekiah basically suffers nigh unto death so that the Lord will deliver his people. And so he takes upon him all the burden of what's going on with this destruction of the people in order for God to look more kindly on his people who maybe are not as righteous as the king, as Hezekiah is. And so he basically intercedes on their behalf and pleads with the Lord to save them, right? It's like when, what's his name prays to save the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And God's like, well, maybe if there's 100, and then maybe if there's, and then he goes back and he's like, pleads more. And he's like, okay, if there's 10, and he goes back, pleads more. He's like, okay, if there's 1, and they couldn't find 1, so the city was destroyed. But you had a prophet essentially pleading on behalf of the people to go from 100 to only 10 to if there's 1 righteous person, spare the whole city. And so this idea they called savior kings, which I found fascinating because it's an archetype of Jesus Christ, who is the culmination of savior kings, right? One who comes and on our behalf took on him all sin and then pleads to God, the destroyer, to not destroy his people. And so as long as we're willing to make the treaty with Christ, we can be spared because he acts as a savior king. But then where I was profoundly struck was that this is an archetype into all social structure. Because do you not act as a savior king for your kids? You bear all the brunt of the world so that your children can live in a safe space. You go out and fight battle every day so that they can have food to eat and a roof over their head. And so we operate in this form of a form of savior kings. And your father did the same for you. And so I felt this immense gratitude towards my dad, and one of the things my dad always says to me, is like, I've been praying for you. Have you felt it? And so I have become cognizant of that over my life as my father has talked to me about praying for me. And I was overcome with this sense of gratitude that my father's prayers on my behalf have saved me in instances where I was not righteous enough to be saved. And so, I thought about that and it motivated me to want to be more righteous to save my children. And then I thought, this is an archetype of the church where the prophet, communes with God for us, prays on our behalf, receives revelation and sacrifices a tremendous amount to bless God's people, the covenant people of Israel. And so I just found it super fascinating that you find this in Joseph Smith's dissertations in the Book of Mormon. And it's super accurate to the point that like the treaty is a preamble first, which introduces the suzerain and his authority. It has historical prologue. It lists what the suzerain has done for the vassal. Stipulations, so it lays out the obligations required for the vassal. Outcomes for obedience and disobedience, so blessings and curses. Witnesses, document clause. I mean, that's like super specific. Now you compare King Benjamin's speech in Mosiah 2-5 to that. And I just walked through it. Let's walk through King Benjamin as he follows the ancient structure, which was only documented by modern scholars centuries later. Right? Nobody knew this except for Joseph Smith. So the preamble, the authority of the king, Mosiah 2:26, I, even I, whom ye call your king, am no better than yourselves are, for I am also of the dust. Benjamin establishes who he is, not exalting himself, but pointing to his authority as a servant of God, which parallels how suzerains introduce themselves as rightful rulers. Like I said, King Hezekiah suffered nigh unto death. They saw themselves as, like everybody else, but in a position to be able to act on their behalf. Humble. I mean, you talk about Christ, born in a manger, son of a carpenter. There's nothing, that wasn't humble about Jesus. Historical prologue, what God has done. Mosiah 2:20-21, you've been kept and preserved by the matchless power of God and even supported by the hand of the Lord. Like the ancient kings who remind the vassals of past favors, Benjamin lists God's past mercies, blessings, and protections, justifying the call to obedience. Stipulations, the terms of the covenant. If ye believe all these things, see that ye do them. Ye will not have a mind to injure one another, but to live peaceably. These are commandments and moral expectations, the stipulations the people must agree to if they wish to accept the covenant. So same thing God does, right? It's a covenantal relationship. If you want the blessings that come from him, you covenant to do the things he asks. Law is irrevocably decreed before the foundations of the world upon which all blessings are predicated. Blessings and curses, outcomes of obedience. If that man repenteth not, his awful guilt remaineth with him. If he shall keep the commandments, ye shall be filled with the love of God. Right? Oh, my sons, I wish that ye would reflect on the blessed and happy state of those that keep the commandments of God. Right? Wickedness never was happiness. It's the same thing. So they lay it out. A direct match to the blessings and curses in ancient treaties. See also Deuteronomy 28 I put in there, which is where they laid that out. God offers peace, joy, and prosperity, or guilt and condemnation. Witnesses, you are witnesses this day that we are willing to enter into a covenant with our God. Just as ancient treaties invoked divine or human witnesses, Benjamin calls upon the people themselves as covenant witnesses, a common Israelite practice. Where do we see witnesses? For us, in every ordinance we perform, there have to be witnesses. That's an ancient Israelite tradition. Document clause, covenant recording. So King Benjamin caused that they should be written. So like ancient treaties, the covenant is formally recorded, symbolizing its binding long-term significance. King Benjamin's speech isn't just a good sermon, it's an ancient treaty. It mirrors almost point for point the same covenant structure used by Israel's neighbors 1,000 years before Christ, and yet Joseph Smith had no way of knowing that in 1829.